You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 22nd of May 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program, Israel reels from the killing of 2 embassy staff in Washington, D.C., while the international community also condemns Israel's firing towards a diplomatic delegation in the West Bank. After that,
so you could have media literacy education while studying biology. You read an article and then you dig deeper into it and try to find out how it was written, what the sources are, and so on.
Finland's education minister tells us why media literacy matters in an age of AI and misinformation. We'll also head to Taiwan to figure out how its energy mix is changing with the end of nuclear power. We'll get the business headlines, and finally, it is Thursday and the global countdown with Fernando Augusto Pacheco is taking on a Latin flavor.
Oh yes, buenas tardes, Chris. Today it's all about fun Argentinian pop on the global countdown.
Gracias, Fernando, gracias. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. We are starting with Israel because there have been 2 developments related to diplomats that have rocked the country and its international relations today. In Washington, D.C., 2 of its embassy staff were shot and killed near the Jewish Museum in the U.S. Capitol in what Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has described as a heinous anti-Semitic act and blamed international leaders in part for their rhetoric. In the West Bank, more than a dozen governments have condemned reports that Israeli soldiers fired warning shots upon a diplomatic delegation that includes staff from the EU, UK, Russia and China. Well, joining us now for more on both of these stories is Daniel Levy, president of the U.S. Middle East Project. Daniel, thanks for coming back on the show. Your reaction to the attack in Washington, first of all.
Well, one has to condemn any such shooting. The details, as I understand them, are sparse at the moment. We don't know whether the individuals were deliberately targeted, whether the shooter knew their identity, but none of that changes the fact that you don't go around shooting people. And I'm sure the full force of the law will be brought against the shooter. This is on the one hand related to developments over there. On the other hand, shootings are a regular occurrence in the US. That's a whole different subject. Gun laws, the ease with which one sees these actions happening.
That is the question in part, isn't it, Daniel? I mean, should the motive matter here? It is happening at an incredibly polarizing time, frankly, for Israel, for Palestinians as well. What have you made of the reaction of how Netanyahu has reacted as well?
Netanyahu, this is a fabulous distraction, and if that sounds a little cold-hearted and cynical, then you should hear how the families of those Israelis still being held captive in Gaza talk about Netanyahu in terms of how he is using the hostages. So one should have no surprise whatsoever, nor hesitate in suggesting that Netanyahu will use this event, exploit this event cynically as much as he can. He is a war criminal in the midst of committing genocide against the Palestinian people. He has an international criminal court arrest warrant issued against him for those war crimes. So if he can divert the attention, if he can use this as a way of attacking his domestic opposition, those who are internationally slowly finding their voice in moving towards holding him to account, then he will do so. That, of course, does not mean that we should take his accusations seriously. They should be dismissed for the bluster, lies and BS that they are.
Daniel, were you surprised by how quickly Netanyahu did pivot, though, in this to the international community? He's sort of laid the blame for this with international leaders, including Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer, Mark Carney, suggesting that they have emboldened such attacks with their rhetoric. What should be the response to that?
The response should be that your war crimes, Mr. Netanyahu, do not justify the actions taken against two individuals in Washington, D.C. last night. And we are not going to be intimidated by your nonsense. The idea that this chap who was the shooter was influenced by what in Washington, D.C., was influenced by what a Canadian, British or French leader would say. And we can't speak to his motivations entirely, his mental state. But the idea that influenced him rather than the scenes that all of us have been watching, which doesn't justify anything, of course, is silly. But what Netanyahu is trying to do, and this is what matters, is he has a tried and tested playbook. And it's not just a Netanyahu playbook. We've seen it with other vile criminal leaders elsewhere in geography and in history. He thinks he can intimidate. However, unlike others, he has tended to be more successful at that because he says, no, I'm not going to listen to your accusations. I'm going to hurl a different accusation at you. And inevitably and invariably, the accusation is anti-Semite. And in so doing, Netanyahu is cheapening that, making anti-Semitism almost a nothing thing, because if everything is anti-Semitic, nothing is. And what those leaders and what everyone else should be standing up and saying is, we will not be intimidated by your nonsense. Whatever happened in Washington, D.C. does not change the fact of the crimes you are committing every minute of the day, the crimes you are telling us you will commit and you continue to commit, the starvation of children, the indiscriminate bombing of civilians, the bombing of hospitals, schools, scholasticide, ethnic cleansing, which they are committing to undertake, squeezing Palestinians, kettle, kill, cleanse is his policy. And rather than being intimidated, those same leaders should show some courage and should go beyond rhetoric to actually implementing sanctions against Netanyahu and the state that is conducting these crimes. Unfortunately, Netanyahu feels he may get away with this. He may be able to intimidate people. And the other thing to note is he is making the world less, not more safe for Jewish communities. Interestingly, one of the opposition leaders in Israel, Yair Golan, the head of the Democrat, formerly Labour Party, has turned around and said, Netanyahu, you are the one, through your words and actions, stirring up anti-Semitism around the world.
Just one quick question, Daniel, because we did also want to get your reaction to what happened in the West Bank with the international community being quite up in arms about these warning shots, at least according to the Israeli Foreign Ministry, that were fired over diplomats there. What do we know about what happened and what's been the reaction?
Well, we know that the diplomats were on a visit. The Israeli military did open fire. It was in the Jenin area. This is somewhere where Israel conducts its military operations, but it was known. One has to be pretty certain to the Israeli military authorities who was there. Israel has kind of said, whoops, won't, a bit of a thing that shouldn't have happened, but they won't take responsibility. But what we know is that they are incredibly trigger happy, whether it's in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem or whether it's in Gaza. They've killed their own hostages. They, of course, indiscriminately kill Palestinians. So one shouldn't really be surprised when an incident like this takes place. Again, the question is not what kind of mealy-mouthed explanations will the Israeli authorities provide. The question is whether this, albeit nowhere near as significant in scale as what is being done to Palestinians, but whether this will nudge some of these countries into action, because the inaction in the face of Israel's crimes is the ongoing headline here.
Daniel Levy, president of the U.S. Middle East Project, thank you very much for joining us. And now here's Laura Kramer with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. A UK judge has paused plans to hand over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. The decision follows a legal challenge from a Chagosian who raised concerns about islanders' rights and future governance. The Netherlands has accused Belgium of stealing its wind. Dutch officials say turbines near the border may breach international law. Amsterdam is now investigating and could take the issue to the EU. And two Akita dogs have been named honorary directors at a Japanese airport. The dogs were welcomed at Odate Noshiro Airport to celebrate the local breed and boost tourism. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Laura. In an age of misinformation, fake news, and artificial intelligence, educating citizens about what's credible and what isn't in the media space is becoming all the more important. And one of the countries that has long put a focus on media literacy is Finland. I'm joined now here in the studio by Finland's Education Minister, Anders Adlercreutz. And Minister, I wanted to start with why this matters. Why is media literacy important for a democracy today?
I think it's essential in a democracy, and actually in Finland we have been focusing on media literacy in our schools for 30 years. But I think you could very well say that it's today more important than ever. We know the hybrid pressure that Europe is facing, especially from Russia. We see what can happen in elections when this hybrid pressure succeeds, when disinformation takes root and those messages are absorbed by the population. So I think it's essential in a world where we, of course, have established media that has established guidelines, but where we have social media where the same is not true, that takes the role of media, where there is very little fact-checking and where it's increasingly difficult in the age of AI to tell true stories from false stories, true images from false images, and so on. So whereas the reason why we have been focused on media literacy might not be the same one that makes it so essential today, I think it has been a prudent path and a prudent policy, and I think it has bore some fruit.
So there are two aspects in what you mentioned there that are important for media literacy. One is the technical aspects with AI and sort of fake news and how do you detect whether something is fake or not. But before we get to that, there is also the credibility aspect, isn't there? These days, there's a lot of questions brought up about who is the messenger, whether we can trust an established media, whether we can trust a government. So how do you go about that when it comes to media literacy to try and convince people which are the credible sources?
Yes. Well, this media literacy approach that we have, many players in society are involved, but if I focus on the schools, I think it's about raising critically thinking citizens, children, young adults that understand how media is produced, what the mechanisms are, what the role of a journalist are, what the role of sources are, how everything is put together. And in Finland, it starts in early childhood education. They see videos, might make them themselves, and then it goes on through the ages. So when in high school, for example, they can make a newspaper, they go into the role of a journalist. Through that, they understand the process. So step by step, they get more involved in media production, media analysis, and media criticism, you could say. And through that, they get the tools needed when then maybe the next day reading a newspaper or seeing a clip in the news or a clip on social media, so that they can ask the right questions and they can try to dig a little bit further and maybe find the clues that might indicate that this is not maybe the whole story or not the story at all.
And when it comes to those technical aspects, that must be, I would imagine, quite a fun thing to do in school in some ways, because there are so many different AI-generated images out of there. You could have a lot of fun with presenting this and a lot of the fake things out there. But I guess one question would be, how do you convince children that this is serious? How do you go about showing them that, there is a danger to all of the fake memes coming out and everything else that we see online?
Well, in Finland, it's not a subject per se. It's an approach that involves all the subjects. So you could have media literacy education while studying biology. You read an article and then you dig deeper into it and try to find out how it was written, what the sources are, and so on. So it's more of an approach to consuming media and teaching children to analyze, to learn from media and to take in the information.
So this is sort of a directive given to teachers across subjects.
Yes, I mean, it's a central part of the curriculum, media literacy. And we've done it, as I said, since the early 90s. Then, of course, we have the question of us adults. I mean, our kids are being educated, but are we adults educated enough? And that's, of course, another concern that is maybe harder to tackle.
Where do you tackle that? Is it something you look at universities to tackle, or do you even look beyond that to sort of adult education and different formats?
We have a National Media Literacy Day in Finland where many companies, many actors are involved. So we also, of course, try to raise awareness about it. We have national watchdogs that, of course, try to point out and force national media to correct itself when problems or falsehoods have been presented and so on. So it's on an adult level, it's more about having the discussion and trying to raise awareness through that. For children, it's about learning the processes, being an object, but of course also a subject that produces media, and through that increasing the understanding.
And just finally, Minister, to go back to the beginning, early education, one other initiative that will be interesting to people that you've adopted in Finland is not allowing mobile phones in schools. And I'm curious about this one because there is this balance, right? You need to keep children interested. Children are used to mobile phones in this digital era that we live in. How has this gone down in schools?
Well, it has gone down really well. I mean, it will become effective from the 1st of August, so it will be reality in schools next term. But it's actually a surprisingly popular piece of legislation. I think it's widely understood that, I mean, not only kids, but also we adults, it's more of a struggle for us to read a book compared to what it used to be. We also have difficulties in concentrating. We are constantly interrupted by the buzzing thing in our pockets. And this, of course, as this affects us adults, it must affect children even more because they have not learned what we have learned. I mean, they are still learning to concentrate, learning to read a book, learning to focus on things. So it's about reacting to this reality, trying to understand that it is a problem if our brains are calibrated to receiving 30-second video clips and not reading books. So we are banning the use of mobile phones in the classroom unless it serves a pedagogical or medical purpose. And through that, we try to create some calm, try to increase reading, trying to decrease the interruptions that mobile phones might cause, and through that improve learning results. And as you mentioned, the reaction of the kids, the teachers are very happy about this legislation, parents are very happy about this legislation, and maybe surprisingly, the kids are not complaining either. It seems that they understand that there is a need for balance, a need for normal social interaction.
And can we learn from this? Should we be banning mobile phones from our workplace meetings as well? Is this the next step?
Well, my personal experience is that if we have meetings where we have left our mobile phones outside, usually are more productive.
Anders Adlercreutz, Finland's Minister of Education. Thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermak. Taiwan has officially become nuclear-free after shutting down its last nuclear power plant this month at the end of its 40-year lifespan. The milestone marks the culmination of a decade-long policy to phase out nuclear energy, but it does raise some critical questions about energy security for an island democracy of 23 million people with some volatile, even hostile neighbors. I'm joined now by Brian Hyo, the founding editor of New Bloom magazine. Brian, thanks for coming back on the show. Let's start with the background for this. Why did Taiwan decide to take this step to phase out nuclear?
Absolutely. So the ruling Democratic Progressive Party has long been opposed to nuclear energy. There's concerns about the impact on Taiwan from seismic activity. Also, Taiwan sees typhoons. There's fears then this could lead to something like the Fukushima disaster in Japan in 2011, and long been concerned about where to put nuclear waste. So this is why the DPP has moved at this juncture to phase out nuclear energy.
And has that stayed steady throughout this past decade since a phase-out was announced? Does the public opinion also agree in Taiwan? I'm curious because we have seen some changes in other countries. After Fukushima, there was, a move to shut down nuclear power, but it has shifted and some are reconsidering nuclear. Has that at all happened in Taiwan?
Interestingly enough, the DPP itself has shifted on nuclear energy, which is why the shutdown is a bit surprising. The DPP has concerns regarding Taiwan's energy supply in the event of a Chinese invasion. And so recently there have been shifts. They have said, for example, they're willing for small-scale nuclear reactors using advanced technology, which is a big shift for a party that is traditionally anti-nuclear. But it's very much tied to partisan politics, where the DPP historically has been anti-nuclear and the opposition KMT is pro-nuclear.
And how has Taiwan's energy mix changed in the meantime, even if, as you suggest there might be some moves back towards nuclear in the future? What does Taiwan's energy mix look like right now?
So Taiwan is highly dependent on imports of oil, for example, liquefied natural gas from abroad. So that is why there are concerns about what would happen in the event of a Chinese blockade of Taiwan, for example. And because of that, then there currently is still this reliance on coal-burning fuel sources, which then are creating air pollution. So that also leads to pushback from the public.
So what does that mean then for the future, Brian, if you can tell us that? What kind of discussions are happening there? Is it about this sort of better, more improved technology, smaller nuclear reactors, or are there other things that are being talked about to improve Taiwan's energy mix, reduce imports, reduce coal use, but also therefore protect from the risk of a Chinese invasion?
Absolutely. So there's a strong desire for more solar and wind power on the part of the government as well. Not only because of just this concern regarding, for example, air pollution and so forth, but because of the push from major companies such as Apple for green supply chains. But then if the capacity is taking time to develop, then there's still this question of what to do if there is this military activity from China. And so I think the government is contemplating nuclear in this way, but also not wanting to offend its supporters, given that the ruling DPP is, of course, traditionally anti-nuclear.
Brian Hyo in Taiwan, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio.
The Foreign Desk is Monocle Radio's weekly world affairs program. We tackle the biggest global news stories as well as those too often left untold.
I think Kagame, who is very adept at reading the signals from the international community, will be thinking, I've got away with it yet again.
Our expert guests offer in-depth analysis and first-hand experience.
You're not going to have someone now who's going to hang up the phone and say, we're not going to do that. There are no more guardrails on Donald Trump.
The Foreign Desk with me, Andrew Muller, is available every Saturday from midday London time, right here on Monocle Radio.
This is The Briefing, and it's time now for a roundup of business headlines with Bloomberg's Ewan Potts. And Ewan, always good to have you back on the show. We're going to start with oil prices, which have been tumbling today. And, there's often a geopolitical element to what happens with oil prices. What's happening today?
Hello, Chris. Yeah, early this year, if you fancied buying yourself a little oil, it would have set you back more than $80 a barrel. Now, today, Chris, if you fancy a lovely barrel of Brent crude, you can get one for just $64, less than $64, in fact. Oil is down close to 15% year to date. Now, the big drop in oil prices took place in the days after April 2nd. You remember that was Donald Trump's Liberation Day, so-called, that enormous list of tariffs on US trading partners. That saw assets right around the world tumbling, as you might not be surprised to hear. But while many assets, including US stocks, have soared since then, after the tariffs were rolled back, a lot of assets have now gone back into nothing to see here mode. That is not the case with oil prices. They continued in the doldrums. And there's another story weighing on the oil price today, and it's not a demand story, it's a supply story. Bloomberg understands that members of the OPEC Plus group are discussing a third consecutive production surge in July. And the majority of analysts in our survey reckon the producer group will hike output by 400,000 barrels a day. That's quite a lot. The politics of all of this are pretty complicated. Group leader Saudi Arabia at the last meeting warned errant members like Kazakhstan and Iraq that it could deliver further production increases unless they fall into line with their quotas. Basically, the Saudis, whose oil is some of the cheapest in the world, is sick of other countries cheating on their quotas, and is happy to take a hit to teach them a lesson. So that's some of the background to today's falling prices.
Ewan, there's so much background to this. So just a quick follow-up. Yesterday oil prices rose because of potential reports of Israel attacking Iran. They're just extremely volatile at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah, they absolutely are. And as you say, the geopolitical picture plays into this as well. Iran is a significant producer. So obviously what goes on in the Middle East is important. There is a little bit more cushion than there used to be in the past, because the biggest producer in the world is now the United States by some distance. They knocked Saudi off their perch a while ago with the advent of shale production. So, of course, for the United States, it's very much a mixed picture when oil prices go down. President Trump is very keen on it because it's a very visible sign of falling inflation in the United States. We all know that Americans are pretty wedded to their cars. But for American GDP, it's a more complex picture because oil is an important component of American GDP. Falling price is not so useful if you're producing oil. But yes, the price has been volatile this year, but it has been pretty much trending downwards since the start of the year. So very useful for the majority of countries in the world which are consumers of oil.
Ewan, just one other story before we let you go. Here in Europe, the EV battery maker Northvolt is not looking good.
Chris, I want to bring you a tale of two EV battery makers today. A source tells us that bankrupt battery maker Northvolt is to stop production at its last remaining factory in northern Sweden at the end of June if it fails to find a buyer. A virtual meeting set to be held today for staff, including the 900 people working at the factory. It's really been a sorry tale of over-rapid expansion and soaring costs at Northvolt. The company was once seen as Europe's best hope of a homegrown battery champion, but since it was founded about 8 years ago, it's amassed about $10 billion in debt and equity. And it's not the first European failure either. UK battery startup Britishvolt collapsed last year, even before it could open its first plant. Contrast that with the story of China's CATL, the company which is the world's biggest electric car battery maker with a whopping 38% market share, had a successful debut on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange earlier this week. The company raised more than $4.5 billion in the share listing. And as to what it's going to do with the money, well, the company says it's planning a major expansion in Europe.
Good luck to that. Ewan Potts of Bloomberg, thank you very much for joining us. This is The Briefing. I mean, that jingle only means one thing at this point. Finally, on The Briefing, it is time for the global countdown, and we are about 1 week out, well, not quite, a few days out from Eurovision, but therefore returning to our sort of regularly scheduled programming. Fernando Augusto Pacheco, our senior correspondent and musical curator, you are here. Where are we headed?
Well, I thought about Austria, but then we did quite recently, Chris, as you might remember, an Austrian special.
We did do an Austrian special. It's almost as if we knew.
Exactly. So I don't want to give an Austrian overdose to our listeners. So I decided to go to Argentina. And I love the music scene in Argentina. It's very fun, very young, very female as well, as you see in the top 5.
Okay, you're quite excited about this one, aren't you?
I am excited. But don't worry, my hermanos, I'm sorry, but your number 5 is actually from Brazil.
I mean, it's very nice, isn't it? It's a bit of neighborly stuff. Isn't that a nice thing? Does it ever go the other way around, Faye?
Sometimes it does. I think there's more cooperation. So even the song we're going to hear, it's not the main version, but there's been a remix with the added vocals of an Argentinian singer. But that's not what we're going to listen right now. It's quite fun. The beat is quite engaging. It is Dennis and Luísa Sonza with Motinha 2.0.
Bota forte, mete marcha, me sai em cima da moto, acelera, túnel bravo, vira eu de lado, bota forte, mete marcha, me sai em cima da moto, acelera, túnel bravo, dança da motinha, dança da motinha, Denis, o bravo.
Fernando, I'm going to call you out on this one, Fernando. Did I understand what you just said is there is an Argentinian version of this they've made, but you chose to play the Brazilian one?
No. Well, the number 5 is the original version.
It is the original.
So, but you know these days, Chris, they keep adding remixes to everything. But this song is basically the dance of the motorcycle. So there's a lot of butt shaking on top of a motorcycle. Don't worry, they're not driving.
Is this a music video? They're not driving?
No.
Okay, well, that's very nice. They're sending, a nice message to our kids. Shake your butts, but stand on the motorcycle while it's not moving.
And Brazilians know how to dance. As I said, the beat is engaging. I like it. Secretly, I do like. Well, not secretly
not
anymore.
Secretly
not
at all,
secretly
Fernando.
anymore.
You like it. Let's just leave it at that. What do we have at number 4?
Number 4 is also quite sexy as well, quite sweaty, because I think the video for that song is set in a heat wave. So there are a lot of kind of fans, packs of ice, cold water,
Getting a theme here.
It's getting hot in here, Chris. This is Emilia, Tini, and Nicki Nicole with Blackout.
So
Actually, this is pretty good, Chris. And you know what? It is...
You're sounding surprised, Faye.
No, it is perhaps better than number 5. But basically, they picked 3 pop queens from Argentina and they're all together. So some commentators are saying, is this like a super group of Argentinian singers? So it's quite a fun, very summery track. I definitely approve.
I was going to say, very summery track, even though Argentina, like Brazil, is heading more into winter now, out of the summer. Is this sort of keeping summer vibes alive?
Absolutely. As the lyrics says, it was hot and that bombshell melted.
All right. What are we, I mean, yeah, I don't know where to go from there. What do we have at number 3?
Something a bit more chilled. And she is a massive name in the Argentina music scene. It's funny because she played cumbia in the past, a little bit of rock, Latin trap. But this song for me feels like a ballad almost. It is Katsu with Con Otra.
No te deseo el mal, pero te va a engañar con otra, será con otra y recordarás de cómo tú te reías el día en que estuve en tu lugar. Y no lo dudo, te lo aseguro. No te
Sounds very sweet, Faye, very folksy.
Sweet, but not that sweet, actually.
Of course, the lyrics are not quite as sweet as the sound suggests, are they?
Some people are saying that she's referencing her ex-partner, Christian Nadal, and his new wife. And what she says in the song, what is stolen comes and goes the same way. So, I mean, the sweet beat, don't get fooled by that.
Okay. There's some drama there, drama in Argentina. What do we have at number 2?
Number 2 is some basic Colombian hip shaking. It's big in all over Latin America. I think it's a fun track. It's by W Sound, which is a music project, in fact, plus Billy and Ovi on the drums with La Plena.
Ay, tiene la magia, tú sí tienes una vainita que a mí me encanta, me enloquece. Verme contigo fue amor a primera vista cuando bailabas así. Por el cuellito, besito y lengüita. Sé que te encanta, te enloquece. Sé que te encanta, te enloquece. Y a veces, sé que te encanta, te enloquece.
That's so catchy.
Fernando, is hip shaking just a way of being in Latin America at this point?
So far, yes. So far with the songs we've been hearing. And it's interesting, this song, because W Sound, as I said, is the name of a music project. And this song is W Sound 05. So this is becoming a little bit of a trend. There's another Argentinian rapper called Bizarrap. He does similar things. So for every song, they invited new artists to do a collaboration with a different song. So that's a very new kind of trend in Latin America.
New trends coming out, but hip shaking remains. Fernando, finally, at number 1, can we expect more of the same?
Well, it's about relationships. It's a bit tough, this one, actually.
Okay, bit more drama, a little more like number 3.
Exactly. And it's Maria Becerra, which I think you might know because we play some of her songs here on Monocle Radio. And this time she's singing with Paulo Londra. They're both from Argentina. The song's called Ramen para dos, ramen for 2, but don't get fooled by the title. Let's have a listen.
Desde el día en que te fuiste, yo no sé por qué mierda no volviste. Sigo aferrada a algo que no existe. Pensar que me olvidaste es tan triste.
Desde el día en que me fuiste, iban a quedar las cicatrices. Tuve que alejarme para no herir.
I mean, ramen for 2, but I also heard a mierda in there, I gotta say.
Yeah.
So that does suggest it's gone in a different direction.
As she says, I keep ordering ramen for 2, but we were never the 2 of us. So it's very, very dramatic. But the weird thing about the song is that the imagery of the video, of course, besides ramen, she's dressed a bit like Sailor Moon. There's a lot of kind of anime kind of connotations. I don't know, it's a little bit of a tribute to Japan, but also the story of a failed couple.
It's a bit of a downer for number 1. Maybe we need to go back to 4 or 5 or 3, somewhere up there.
Give us a motorcycle, baby.
Fernando Augusto Pacheco, thank you very much for joining us. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Hassan Anderson. Our researcher was Francesca Jilks and our studio manager was Flynn Simons. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Termack. Goodbye and thanks for listening.